I think another component in here is that concept of integrity. I mentioned it was one of the synonyms in the dictionary definition. I know you always like, nobody cares about dictionary definitions, but to me, it was giving me like a little bit more insight into words and how we're using them and how I'm using them. And integrity is connected to individuation. It's an understanding of self that is undivided. It's understanding my whole complete self. Integrity is also following the complete self. So a piece of this is ensuring or watching for when the parts of myself internally, and again, I think this is where the introverted judging functions really come into play. I keep bringing it back there because I think they're the best access point. They're not the only one. It's complex and a lot of different components come in here. But I think they might be some of the most solid on-ramps. Is just check in and see how I feel about myself in those ways. You can keep your finger on the pulse of when you're a house divided. Now, we did a whole podcast on the concept of individuation and what it means to be a complete self and a whole self. And that's a journey. It's not a destination. We don't actually live long enough to understand our whole self. And material is always coming in and being amalgamated because as we live life, we get more complex. We get more of ourselves to explore. We die long before full individuation happens. But we can, at any given time, understand a broader picture of ourselves. And sometimes we're leaving money on the table. Sometimes there are parts of ourselves that we could understand, but we're turning away from it. That's that whole idea of like, that's the thing over here that I don't want to look at, or that's the thing over here that I don't want to look at. Generally called the shadow. Anything that's in our unconscious, anything we don't really want to look at, that's quote unquote shadow work. But what's the good news is that anytime we actually do look at it and bring it into the light, it's no longer shadow work. Now it's conscious. Now we're aware of it. And there will always be shadow content. There's always going to be things about ourselves that we don't currently have access to. But we can do the work of looking at those things. This is where responsibility comes into play. This is where a willingness to fail comes into play, an ability to learn from one's poor, good and bad choices. And this is where we are able to observe when we have contradictory and conflicting parts of ourselves. I think we believe that we need to, everything inside, all of the parts of us inside need to always be in chorus with each other when we make any choice. This is part of the reason why people hesitate, because they haven't made peace with the fact that 90% of you could be like, forward, let's go, let's march, there's nothing stopping us. And there will always be 10% is like, it's a terrible idea, we totally shouldn't do that. And we're like, oh, if there's any part of me that doubts it all, that means that I'm in conflict with myself and I can't move forward. I have no trust in my own ability to handle it and know that the 90% of me is probably the part I should be listening to. Once you understand that whole self, an undivided self, is not a self that is constantly in course with itself, right? It's not like the council members internally will always be shouting in a beautiful, harmony of every decision. There's always a part of you that's like, I don't think that's good for us. But if we're aware of it, then when we have this like little feeling, this little like, maybe it's not a good idea, that single tiny thought, we won't give so much weight to because we'll realize that's basically all decisions. Every once in a while, somebody won't have that. Every once in a while, somebody say, and then when I met my spouse or partner or my husband or wife or whatever, they'll go like every part of me, it was like Kundalini rising. Like every part of me was in the like, yes, absolutely, no questions, move forward. The universe gave me a download, everything, like angels were singing, and that was it. But if you notice, most people don't have that story about their partner.
Yeah.
That's just every once in a while we get struck with that. Or somebody goes, I knew for a fact that this was my purpose. Or I knew for a fact this one thing that, and it was so noteworthy because every other decision I've ever made in my life has always had a little bit of doubt. 100% of all the other ones, like 99.999 with like the line above the 9 have been like, there's been a part of me is like, maybe. But that one, that stood out because it was all 100% yes. If we understand how that mechanism works, that there's always a part of us that is questioning and is there for a purpose to make sure that we don't make terrible decisions, then we thank that part of ourselves and go, I get it. I trust that you're showing up just to make sure I've checked in. I trust that this part of me that's hesitant is making sure I've checked in with all the information I need to check in with. And then I'm going to trust that the other 90% of me being on board is good, and I'm going to go forward. When we don't understand how that works, we don't get the concept of being, like the house divided is more about awareness than it is about chorus. It's about things whispering to us from the shadows that we're not really we're not directly paying attention to, so we're unsure of how much it's influencing us. When we do everything we can to bring that content into our conscious awareness, even if parts of ourselves are not on board with each other, we can at least manage and wrangle them and go, well, I guess I'm 51-49 on this one. I'm going to go ahead with the 51, and we'll see what happens. And if the 49% of me was right, good for you, 49%, and we'll learn the right lessons.